All right, it is Tuesday, February 6th. We are back for episode 9 of Sundered Ages
9.
Talks, Crafting
Ooh.
and Professions. Yeah, we're on
almost at the
week
double
5.
digits.
Yeah,
Dang.
funny enough,
Week
Sundered Ages
9.
Talks, Crafting
Nope.
and Professions.
I didn't mute myself.
Yeah. All right, there we go. Funny enough, we won't have an episode this Friday, so episode 10 will actually be week 6. But we do have an important thing to talk about today, and I hinted at it on Friday. Today, we're speaking on crafting and professions, and if we have time, we might sprinkle in a little bit of the magic item creation, which is sort of a crossover there.
Yeah, I think just to start out, as a testament to professions never really being a thing in traditional D&D, like they were never fully fleshed out. I've almost always seen them done as a homebrew like gestalt system. And I think gestalting is something that we might talk about on a later thing, but
Paladin game.
Yeah, the Paladin game, like we were all some sort of crafter. I was a paladin that did jewel crafting, and it was inherent in the storyline. It made it made sense of the progression of the game. But anytime someone did it, it was a homebrewed version, right? It wasn't because what they had was 1, minimal, and 2, it sucked. It wasn't exciting. Didn't really make me, we had to make our own mechanics on how it worked because what they had was just total trash. And by they, I mean Wizards. Whoops. But so it's unfortunate because professions should be there. And I've run campaigns. You were part of one, even though that one was very short-lived, where I made people choose a profession at the start of the game. I said, what class do you want to be? And then also, what profession is your person? Because I wanted to help people. Most of the people who were playing were new players, so I wanted to use it as sort of a way to help them get used to role-playing. And I think an easier way was to be, this is what I did before I was an adventurer, and this is what I do now.
Yeah, it's a character background thing, kind of like sometimes there are traits that are like miniature feats that you used to select at character creation, and you'd say like, oh, my character is, he grew up in by the docks, and so he deals with people from all over, so he starts the game with an extra language, right? Or, your character had to grow up on the streets as a thief, and so he's got like a +1 to sneaking and pickpocketing as like his background trait. Like it was sort of like a feat, but it was something you couldn't take later on.
Right.
And professions professions can be just like that.
And the bonuses that come with them never needed to ever be even substantial. Because I think if professions are done properly, again, it helps the role-playing aspect, but it just makes people feel like their character's a little more special, right? It helps you tie yourself to that person, because you're the one who chooses it. So you're like, shit, I want my guy to be like a really dope cook. Like, even though he's a fighter and like he wields this giant-ass blade, I want him to be the best at making like a souffle. Like, he has this strong... Yeah, he has this strong side, but he also has this like gentle side with a bit of finesse that is just like his almost an alter ego, and people totally get into it. So it doesn't need to be a big like, this is the benefits you get, here are the numbers. Like it's something that can be small that has a huge impact as far as the game is played too.
Okay. All right. Well, so that's as you know and I know, and anyone that someday watches these will know, we have anecdotes for years.
Years.
For years. But let's get into it. Okay, so crafting, the way that it was traditionally handled.
Ooh.
3rd edition, and I believe AD&D as well, and then 3.5 and Pathfinder all had basically 2 ways, but really 1.5. So the way that you crafted was just the craft skill, and it was never explained overly well in the books, and it was just like craft, intelligence skill, and then it would give you some examples, and at the front of the list every time was blacksmith, because really that's the only thing that the book was prepared in any way to teach you, like, to give you an idea of here's what you could do with it. And it might also list things like yeoman, or bowyer, or poisoner, or something. But it generally wouldn't really give you much information on those, and even when it did give you as much as it gave you for smithing, there was usually less that you could do with it. So, for example, like for blacksmith, you would have the list of all the items, all the weapons, right, and an armor, and it would say, okay, so you take your blacksmith skill, and you roll a d20, and you add your bonus to the 20, and then you add or multiply the DC of the item you're making, and the DC is going to be like 10 plus 1 per AC value. And then you figure that out, and that's the amount that you turn over per week in silver or per day in copper. And for people that thought that the grappling rules were difficult to, like, get a good grasp on, pun, for people that thought that grappling was hard to grasp, crafting was like, who's going to bother, right? And even at the end of the day, if you understood all the rules and you'd say, okay, so here's my bonus, here's what I could do per day, then you have someone inevitably ask, like, okay, so when you think of armor, people are always like, oh, okay, so there's like there's the chain shirt, and everybody wants the mithril chain shirt because it's super lightweight, but
awesome.
It's or mithril chain mail because it's still counted as light or medium armor depending on the edition, and then full plate. And full plate was like, oh, it's 300, it's like 1,500 gold or whatnot. And you go, okay, well, how long does that take me to make? I'm level 7 or 10 or somewhere right in the middle there. It's going to take 300 days. Right? And you think to yourself, like, okay, I'm a level 7 adventurer. Or 10, we'll say level 10. And you think, okay, not to over-meta it, but if you took, like, the loot chart for a challenge rating 10 encounter, each of you is walking out with 300 plus gold. If you go through one dungeon that in-game might take your characters like a week and a half, maybe even a month, say you're there for an entire month, you are most definitely coming back with, at the very least, the value of a suit of plate mail. At the very least. And you did it in like 10% of the time. So it never scaled properly. Like, your ability to smith never scaled because the game had set prices for things, and then it didn't nothing at all in traditional sort of D&D scaled, like, multiplicatively, right? It was all a linear growth kind of thing. Like, no, you got one more bonus each level, and then one more bonus the next level. And so you will never fundamentally do this faster. You'll just get slightly and slightly and slightly better, and expensive stuff will always take forever and a day.
Yeah. And there, to play the devil's advocate a little bit, I mean, I understand that there has to be, like, a time constraint, because one, it has to be somewhat realistic. Like, making a thing of plate mail, one, has to more or less fit to the person's body. So it should take some time. 300 days might be reasonable. I don't know. I haven't made actual plate mail. But again, the tale of, talking about the stories versus each other, being a player, anyone's going to pick going into the dungeon to do that over crafting. Part of what they've done wrong is they've made crafting have a sour taste in people's mouth, right? No one wants it because it doesn't seem fun.
Especially because whereas crafting is a thing that you might say, oh, my character's a blacksmith, or whatever. For example, a blacksmith. And so you roleplay that in certain ways. You've got, like, your smithing tools with you. Maybe your DM rolls that into the story somehow. But as far as, like, what the skill actually does, making money, producing gear and whatnot, the guy or girl in your group that has like the equal skill in something like perform churns out something like 4 to 5 times the amount of money.
Jesus.
In the same amount. Like, they just... The amount of money that you got for some skills scaled seemingly, like, in a multiplicative way. Like, oh yeah, a bard by the time they were... Or not even a bard, someone just with performs, like a rogue. By the time that they're level 10, and they've got, 13 ranks in it, maybe they took skill focus, they've got a plus 16 or 20 or whatever with a masterwork instrument, there's no way that you actually building physical things like a suit of plate mail, you can't keep up with the amount of money that the performer is making.
Yeah.
And whereas the performer, you can say, okay, you guys, as the DM, okay, you guys are going to be in town for a week before this thing happens. What do you do? And the smith might say, like, oh, okay, well, I find a shop and I work there. Or I'm working on this project that I've been doing it, on the road. And you'll get almost nothing done in that amount of time. The performer is out there for 7 days, and he's like, oh, I'm going to make perform checks, and I'm going to gather information at the same place that I'm performing at. And at the end of the week, he's got a bag of gold, and he's got the information he got for gathering information. And it's like, that skill was just better in every way.
Yeah. It's funny because you don't find... I've never found a lot of people doing the, like, okay, I'm gonna do some blacksmithing stuff on the side. Because even that, like, role-playing wise, I think if you put it into money, there's not much you can do for a blacksmith money-wise that would even make sense or be fun.
No, it always ends up being a story thing, right? Like, you work for the town guard, or you are a personal smith for some person that needs high-class weapons, or you're, like, in the game, you're a bunch of paladins, and, like, you're crafting your own gear because your church is outlawed, and you don't have anyone that you can go to for this kind of stuff.
So... we were also smithing. Yeah, they did a bad job of it, right? It was never fun. It didn't ever make sense as far as numbers went, and you couldn't really make anything that was much better than you could find in a random loot table, anyways.
You're like, oh, I could craft a dagger in one day, and it's like, okay. All right, well, you could probably also just randomly take that from like, the mook that you killed outside the bandit hideout had 3 daggers on him. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about just professions in general. So we were talking about how I had forced people to choose professions because I thought it helps people. It helps new people get into a character idea.
But what I've realized more is that, I started it as a forced thing, but people got really into it. Professions weren't ever a thing. I think they might be a thing in 5th edition, a little bit. I think you can have, I forget what it's called, like a specialty.
Well, even crafting skills are not a thing in 5th edition.
Right.
There's proficiencies with trade items. I don't understand why they did that, but we're professions.
Yeah, they have sort of professions or like trade skills, but it means very, very little. It's mostly like flavor text stuff, which isn't bad, but they still don't follow through with it. It doesn't make anybody feel special, and that's to me, that's the point of professions, is to just put more lore onto your character. Like, it's something that could be so simple, again, that doesn't need to add a lot of mechanical stuff to it, because you already have you may already have a feat system and ability system and skills and all that. You don't need to add more, because it's just going to get too complex. So what I think they did is they just didn't have it, or they made it optional again, like feats, which is just wrong. Like, I think you should always have the option for the players who want it. If you want to make D&D or Sundered Ages or anything like that, rise to the occasion and make it a super complex game, you can. And there's a lot of room for people who love Linux and just want to build everything from the ground up. That's great. But, if you remove all of that option and say, we're just going to make it for this, it's either there are professions or not. And I think they chose there wasn't. It sucks, because then there's just everybody's a warrior who maybe said they might be a blacksmith too, or
Yeah,
a
okay.
mercenary,
So-
whatever.
So then, in older editions, then when professions was a thing, and professions from 3X and Pathfinder was just a straight up skill, just like crafting. But they're
Oh yeah,
like they're like a career skill, and I know blacksmithing sounds like a career skill, but a profession. And I don't think they didn't give you like a hard list of like here are the things you could do. They're like, oh, profession, like
you wrote it in, didn't you?
yeah, you wrote in this the craft thing, but you were like, oh, I'm a sailor, or I'm an herbalist, or I'm a banker, or a guard, or a tavern owner, or or whatever. And you, as far as like the DMs that I played with, and then when I ran games, you would basically pick like 3 or 4 situations in which you would gain a bonus from that profession. So you'd say like, okay, so you're going to be a sailor, so I'm going to give you a bonus in swimming, I'm going to give you a bonus in use rope, and I'm going to give you a bonus in any attempt to like man or steer like a craft, or maybe like a minor repair check kind of thing if you're trying to fix like a sail. And that would be the thing. And like, so it wasn't something that was ever going to be super impactful, but it made for sort of like clutch moments in games where you're like, oh, I'm a sailor, and like the captain NPC gets gunned down, and you look around and it's like, oh, can anyone drive the boat? And you're like, I'll do it. I'll fucking do it. And you get up there and you roll like the 13, and you're like, oh, but I've got like 14 ranks in sailor.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, it turns out you were the captain that everyone always needed.
Yeah, but not the one they deserved.
Yeah, but so sailor, more so than craft, was sailor. Profession was like some spice for your character. And I'm gonna say I put it in the same category that I put feats in for older editions. I love the idea, and I think whoever came up with it for 3rd edition forward should be commended, and they probably should have given it more space. Professions probably should have been that character trait that you picked at level 1. Not that you couldn't maybe change it later, right? Which is sort of the way that it's handled in Sundered Ages, but that that everyone would have one, and then you could decide as the player whether that was going to have any bearing in your character going forward. Like maybe you're an herbalist, right? And then you start the game and you're level 1 rogue or wizard or cleric or fighter, whatever. And it very rarely comes up, and your character kind of puts it behind him. But it's always something that you can go back to, or the DM can go back to put like little hooks and things in the story to make it feel like a real world. Like, and it'll always be like, oh, if you see an NPC that you knew when you were younger, when you were an herbalist, there's always that tie-in. There's the people that there's the people you might know, the people that might know you, the places that should be familiar to you. What does your character do? You're level 5 or 6, you haven't been back to your hometown or city or whatnot, and you get that missive that says like, oh, like Lady Greenheart, the person that ran the herbalist shop, she died, and no one's seen her daughter for 5 years. She left you the shop in her will. And so, like, now you might have, like, a cool new adventuring hook. Like, oh, okay, well, you're going to go back, you're going to claim it, you're going to do something with it, even if it's just finding someone that you think will be better to run the shop. Like, it's an opportunity for character-driven narrative. And it's an easy in for the DM, where the player also gets to feel like, this is just another thing that I got to choose for my character. Like, here's another thing that made my fighter different than the other fighter, or my rogue different than the other rogue.
And I had just looked up, because I knew 5th edition had added sort of, like I was saying, there's sort of professions, and I was trying to remember what they were, because when I ran that short 5th edition game, I hated everything about it. So there's characteristics that you do when you first create a character. So you add personal traits, So not things like my character's smart, but like one being the example here in the wiki is I read every book in Candlekeep. Because it's something that adds flavor to your character.
Okay.
And then you have ideals, so things that you believe in strongly. Bonds. Bonds are characters' connection to people, places, events. And then flaws. So you choose these things as well as proficiencies. Let me try to look that up.
Proficiency is everything from weapons to trade skills.
I remember there being a thing where you could like select. But so they basically added a section for it, but it was like the most dumbed down, terrible way for children. Like,
do you think a new person coming in, are they going to understand what it is that they're choosing, and is it apparent? Like, is it transparent on like what it is that they're picking from?
I don't think it is. So here's the crazy part. It's so vague and so elementary that I think it's actually going to confuse a lot of people. Because like you said, I don't think they're going to know what it's for. I think they're going to think, like, what mechanically am I doing this for? Because that's what I feel like a lot of people, especially when they're new, they're really overwhelmed with the mechanics of D&D or Sundered Ages. So they focus on that so much, but obviously not every single thing has some mechanical, thing. Sometimes it's just lore reasons. So they're gonna look at it and be like, "What the hell is this for?" And a lot of it just sounds like, "Oh no, this is like how you define your character." And it's like, well, I've already sort of defined them. Like I know what I know. I want my character to be this and this. Do I really need it right now? And that they read everything by candlelight. Yeah, like. And it's like I'm not trying to shit on that because I get where they're going with it and I appreciate it, but it's literally watered down to the lowest level of like how to add flavor to your character.
It's too like so it's too vague, which is
far too vague.
Is the direction that they've been going with crafting and professions since 3rd edition is getting more and more vague and sort of here's the thing. But we're not going to nail you down on it, right? Like, you could pick it, and you could sort of do some stuff.
I think there are backgrounds as well from
Yeah, well, backgrounds is another, like, level 1 character feat kind of deal.
Here we go. Yes, so backgrounds actually add something. So it gives you proficiencies, and it gives you items.
Yeah, which is a background would be a profession of sorts. Like, I imagine a background for a guard might give you weapon proficiency in like some sort of basic weapon for whatever the soldiers or guards used in your area.
To me, it's like, so there's a list of backgrounds, and again, this is like class versus classless. Like, I don't find one that hits exactly the things that I want. Like, there's ones that are pretty close, but I don't want to be a clan crafter or a far traveler or a gladiator. I mean, there's a decent amount, maybe 30, but yeah, I feel like they've either gone too vague and they've then added sort of hallways for people to get stuck down and having to choose between things.
You mean the same glut that you used to see in feats and spells? That there's a dozen that might be worthwhile and then the rest are filler.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a bummer. Again, this is the stuff that these are the type of things that turn people off because it's like, what is the point? Do I really need to do this? There's definitely a better way. Just let people choose their own. Let people have their own name and just give them a system where they can be like, choose any of this, any of those. This is what you get. This is what you get your bonus in, right? Like exactly like the sailor thing. Just choose 3 things. And give it whatever name you want. Why not do that? That's so much easier than being like, we made 40 of them for you. Hopefully one of them falls into something you want. Because if not, you still have to choose one because then you're just going to be a little bit worse otherwise.
Yeah, and you know what? That reminds me, because I've been checking fairly often recently, in that it's not new to 5th edition. But when people raise questions like the ones we're talking about tonight, for something like crafting or professions or feats or classes or whatnot, the first response 9 times out of 10 is, oh, in my group we homebrew it this way, right? And it's like, okay,
so you're admitting the system is flawed.
Yeah, so it's an admittance that the system is not properly covering the ground that your characters are walking on, right? Like it's not explaining to you, it's not showing you how you would do the things that you want to do. And I think, I remember I've been playing, I think, since I was about 12, and homebrewing was a thing when I first started because my DM had no real idea how the rules worked. We were all 12. And then later on, I don't think there was any real homebrewing until I was like 20 years old. Like through 3rd edition and into 3.5, there was a lot of stuff that was hammered down fairly well for what we wanted to do. And then homebrewing had been growing in the background for a couple of years on this and that, and that's sort of where Pathfinder came in, was that enough people had homebrewed enough things that Pathfinder was made as an alternative system that said, like, hey, fighters are boring, like, let's fix that. A lot of people have been doing things with them. Hey, this is bad, we're going to fix it, we're gonna balance it. I feel like 5th edition now, it has had so many, like, 5th edition itself is 3 or 4 years old now, in 2018.
Which blows my mind.
And, yeah, I remember I heard about it coming out, and I was like, already? Like, when did 4th edition come out? But it seems like it really should have a lot of this stuff fairly well nailed down, at the point that it is the official form of D&D, of Dungeons and Dragons. It had regular D&D, advanced, 3rd, 3.5, 4th, 100,000 splat books across the editions to iron out what prestige classes should be like, what balance should look like, all the cool zany spells and feats that never get added back into the core books, despite the fact that some of them almost certainly should be. And then stuff like this, like crafting, is completely overlooked. Crafting in 5th edition is just as boring as it was in 3rd edition. And yet, anyone that I've spoken to for, a couple hours on D&D always has a story about either one of their characters or someone in their group that was like the group blacksmith or the group cook or whatnot, and like what a cool aspect of their character it was. And I feel like the system doesn't do enough to help you, like, to help you realize how you could put that into your character, and also, like, what should the tangible benefits be, right? Like, you could look at your character at level 1 and the DM goes, okay, everybody pick a profession. You're like, oh, I'm going to be a circus performer, and he's like, alright, you're a circus performer. Well, what benefits do I get? You don't get any. Like, but when people talk about your past, you can tell them you were a circus performer. Like, you go like, okay, well, like, that might give my character some history, but how did I lose those skills? And it's like, oh, well, you weren't, Samus Aran style. Like, you fell on a grate and all your superpowers fell out. All your upgrades left. It doesn't seem like it does enough, and it's not straightforward enough for new people to get, and the people that have been around long enough are homebrewing more and more and more every month on 5th. And so I think they're ready for a change.
Yeah, it is. Yes, they are. It's disheartening every time I look up a topic or anytime I like quickly Google something for research before we do these. What I do find is people complaining about them. I occasionally find a way where people are homebrewing their own stuff, which is like, okay, yeah, the system's flawed. That's what I expect. But like a lot of it is just like, here's this thing with fifth edition, and I'm not okay with it. Like, this is just unruly. Like, I had just looked up the crafting stuff, and I had saw like the amount of time that it takes to do stuff in 5th edition is just like it doesn't scale. I was looking up just vague things about it a few weeks ago, and someone had literally has a blog dedicated to what they hate about 5th edition. It's some woman in Ohio. Like, it's so sad because there's people who desperately want Wizards to fix it. There's things that have needed to be fixed, and there are things that they really liked that just didn't get pushed forward. And we have this husk of a game now,
and
where
there are more people playing D&D today than there ever have been.
Yeah.
And as those people mature into the hobby, I think more and more of them are going to see the shortcomings of it.
Yeah. But again, their loss is our growth. So I think that gets it to around 30 minutes today. That went really quickly.
Yeah. And then I'm actually going to be out of town on Friday, so we won't be doing episode 2 this week. We'll be going to episode 10 or part 2 next Tuesday, where we'll be getting into how does Sundered Ages handled crafting.
It's fun. Spoiler alert.
Pro tip. It's a skill just like everything else. We use a thing called Vocations instead of Professions that is a character thing tied to you from level 1 forward. And there are bonuses for crafting that are not just, I make the thing slightly faster.
Yeah. Yeah, you can hit people with an anvil and stuff.
I think that's Ragnarok Online. I'm not 100%.
It just drops from the sky.
Yeah. Okay. But yeah, we'll pick it up there on Tuesday, and we're really gonna blow
see you next week.
people's socks off on how much better it is.
Boom.